Hello, students. Welcome to the first lecture video for Soc 204 Introduction to Sociology. Here we are. I'm your professor, Dr. Randall Blazak. I'm up here in the vinyl attic. This is a room where I also record the videos from my YouTube channel, Vinyl Fetish, where I talk about vinyl because I'm kind of like there's vinyl everywhere. There's vinyl all over. This is my vinyl attic. Some of these lecture videos we'll do downstairs. Some of them we'll do other places. Some of them are new. Some of them go back to the pandemic. Some of them will be intriguing. Some of them will be mind-numbing. But hopefully they'll all be engaging and give you some stuff that we will be talking about in class or not be talking about in class. So this is meant to complement our in-class conversations that we have and to augment that material. So what I would encourage you to do is treat this like a class. So I would take some notes. There's a real correlation between students who take notes and the grades they receive. I've noticed this from doing this the decades that I've been doing is that students that don't write anything down usually don't do well on tests and things like that. So take notes. There will be a lecture question. For most of these videos, they will have a corresponding lecture question that you will answer on D2L, and you'll receive instructions about that. So, pay attention, take notes, and pretend like we're in the physical classroom. This all started during the pandemic when we had to move everything remotely. We had to come up with new ways of reaching students, delivering the same material, even though we couldn't meet in the classroom. So things have changed a little bit. So these are now meant to augment the class, to add to your experience. All right. So what this first one is about is we're just going to give you some grounding ideas about where sociology comes from, kind of the origin story of sociology, and kind of how we come about this idea about being sociological about things. So the first thing we want to do is turn off our phones. The first thing we want to do is kind of give you a good working definition of sociology here at the beginning. And we're going to start with a really basic textbook definition. This is pretty close to the definition that's in your Giddens textbook. And we're going to just describe sociology as the scientific study. We'll put it up on the screen here so you can write it down or screenshot it or whatever you need to do. The scientific study of human society and social behavior. The scientific study of human society and social behavior. So there's a whole bunch in that little phrase that's packed into that. The first thing is the word science. We're going to talk about science. We are a science. We are a social science. So that means the values of science, the same values that you would find in chemistry and brain science, like people that operate on brains. It's going to be some of the same basic principles that we're using. So we're coming from a scientific perspective. This isn't just about people's opinions about things and how the world works. That's called philosophy. You should also take that class. But we are a science, and we are based on scientific principles, which we'll get into today. Another part of that is a study of human society, how we organize ourselves. Are we hunters or gatherers? Are we industrial society? Are we hierarchical or collective? How is our society organized? What do we do in our society? What do we spend our time on? Do we spend our time on watching sports, or do we spend our time on human sacrifice? Sometimes they're the same thing. So how do we organize ourselves as a collective? And then the third part of that is about social behavior, which includes very individual level interaction. How do we interact with each other? How do we define the things that are important to us? How do we define love? How do we define success? How do we define happiness or good health? There's just a bunch of reports that just came out about the link between alcohol consumption and cancer. So we're having a conversation now as a society about, should I be drinking so much? Is it going to give me a tumor? And so, we're organizing ourselves differently, and we're also interacting on a different level. There may be people who are going to go out and have a few and like, cancer runs in my family. Maybe I should have a mocktail. So we're interested in addressing all these things from a scientific perspective, and that's kind of the starting point of talking about sociology. We are in the sciences. And there's a notion of the hard sciences like chemistry and physics, and which makes it sound like social sciences are soft sciences, but we're harder than the hard sciences. We're harder than the hard sciences because we're studying people, and people are a little bit crazy, a little bit hard to predict. It's easier to study mice and molecules than um, teenagers, for example. So science, science, science. We're coming from a scientist. So where does this come from? We got to give a little bit of an origin story. If you're a comic book fan, you know that every superhero has an origin story. Sociology is a superhero, at least in my mind. So it's got to have an origin story. No, it wasn't bit by a radioactive spider. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And so we want to kind of give you a little bit of a history lesson today. Okay. And that means we're going to talk about a historical phase in human development called the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, sometimes called the Age of Reason. Now, before we go any farther, one of the things I want to point out is that, and I'm just being honest here, is that when we talk about this history and we talk about this particular discipline, sociology, we're coming from a very Eurocentric perspective because of the way the world has organized itself, especially in terms of colonialization. A lot of the facts and pieces of the story we're getting are coming from a very European and North American perspective. What do I mean by that? That there are similar thoughts and ideas that have evolved over the millennia that have come from Asia, including India, that have come from Africa, that have come from the Middle East, that have come from Mesoamerica, that we don't talk about, and that we should. And one of the nice things that Giddens does is in the first chapter talks about, yeah, this is a discipline that was created by and often for white men, but there are people of color, there are women, there are others who are part of the sociological story. But we just want to be honest and talk about the Eurocentric nature of this discipline. That's why we're sort of focusing on the Enlightenment as part of this. Okay, so where do we start? Where do we start? This is a long history. Human beings have been on Earth about 150,000 years, best as we can guess, as modern humans. So we've got a long history of where we can talk about when things start. When does, opera start? When does yacht rock start? When does anything start? So we're going to start kind of in medieval Europe. And Europe, for a long period of time, really does not change. If we think about the Dark Ages and the medieval period, it's really, we really sort of get this shift when Emperor Constantine comes in and legalizes Christianity in 313 AD, or as we would now say CE, Common Era. AD is Latin, CE is for Common Era. So you hear BC, before Christ. That's kind of a religious view. So we might say BCE, before the Common Era. So you'll see those things together. But the year 313, Constantine converts to Christianity, and the Roman Empire becomes the Holy Roman Empire and sets up a domination of Europe by a central entity, which is the Catholic Church based in Rome. And the Catholic Church sort of rules everything in Europe. It rules the way people look at the world, the way they interact, where their money goes. Everything is sort of fed through the power of the Catholic Church as the one explainer of everything. And it's explaining literally everything, including where did we come from? Where did the human race come from? What happens when you die? Why do good things happen to bad people? Where are there witches in your neighborhood? I mean, the Catholic Church is sort of the sole mediator of all knowledge that's in the world. And it basically stays like that. And it's one of the reasons that we call it the Dark Ages, because all the knowledge that had been accumulated, for example, in ancient Greece, all goes bye-bye. All those things are destroyed, and now the Pope is the sole sovereign of all knowledge, and that's it. So there's a lot of behavior that would seem kind of crazy to us now, like the incredible number of women who were burned at the stake. No, there were no witches that were burned in medieval Europe. There were no, because witches don't exist. We burned women. We burned women alive. And so that stagnates Europe. I mean, there are some blips. I mean, one of the things, I was thinking about this a lot during COVID, is the bright side of the bubonic plague. In the 1340s, bubonic plague wipes out almost the majority of the population of Europe. And because people don't understand, they're not scientists, they don't understand germs, they don't understand that you should wash your hands. And so people are just dying right and left in the most horrific kind of way. The bubonic plague was grotesque. And when it finally wound down in the mid 1300s, that was the birth of the Renaissance. There was this sort of explosion. We've been focused on death so much and what happens to us when we die, go into hell and all that stuff. Let's celebrate life. So out of this, you get Leonardo da Vinci and all the great artists that come out of the Renaissance, because there's this celebration. So the Renaissance was a little bit of a blip, but basically everything is the same century after century after century. It's the same castle, it's the same kings and queens, and the same, no dragons. That's another TV show, but it's basically unchanged. You can't be like, yeah, the 1300s are so much better than the 1200s. It was pretty much basically the same. Then something happens, and that's something that happens is the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s. The 16th century sees sort of something new emerging. And what's new is sort of two things that happen at the same time. One is this advent of technology. Something called the Gutenberg press allows mass production, not at the level of Amazon, but it used to be, before the Gutenberg press, if you wanted a book, and the main book that you wanted was the Christian Bible, which took a while from Constantine to get together, right? They were figuring out what to put in it and what not. Some books were being taken out. We call those the Gnostic texts, were being taken out. Some things were being put into what became known as the King James Version of the Holy Bible, because there are many versions of the Bible, but the King James Version of the Holy Bible became sort of the official version of the Bible. It's like, Taylor's version. It's the official, word of God in this book that was assembled by people. Before the Gutenberg press, there is only a handful of Bibles around, because you know how you get I don't know if you've ever seen the Bible. I've got one around here somewhere. It's pretty long. It starts at Genesis chapter 1 and ends in Revelations, and there's a whole bunch of words in between. Now you just would hit a button and, it would come off a printing press. In those days, monks would sit with a Bible and some paper and hand copy every single word from Genesis to Revelation. Sometimes they would change things. I don't like that wording in the beginning. Let's change it to something else. Like, they would edit along the way. So there would be multiple versions of the Bible, but it took a long time. And so that meant one of two things. One is only people who had sort of power, money, had access to this book called the Bible, right? Because they were few and far between. But the other part of it is most people couldn't read anyway. I mean, most people were completely illiterate in medieval Europe. People weren't sitting around in book clubs. People were just sort of, digging in the dirt. And so if you wanted to find out what was in the Bible, or what the Bible said, or what the Bible meant, or what it was all about, Alfie, what happens when you die, and, why is there evil in the world, and all those, you had to go to the priest, because they were the only ones, A, that had the Bible, and B, that could read it. So all your power went to them. Tell me what it means. And they could be like, yeah, this is what it means. You should, give me your money and your wife. Like, they could say whatever they wanted to, because they controlled the flow of information. So what happens with the Protestant Reformation is sort of two things. One is the printing press allows an alternative way of producing Bibles, meaning more get out to market. Instead of just a handful, as the printing press becomes more popular and books and texts become out, people would decide they should start to learn to read. So there's also an increase in literacy that's happening. And again, we're talking about 1500s Europe. But the other thing is a rebellion against the church that we call the Protestant Reformation, led by Martin Luther and other thinkers. And what they basically said is the church shouldn't be the only one to figure it out. The church shouldn't be the only one to tell you what each of these chapters in this holy book means. Maybe, hold on here, just think about this. You could figure it out for yourself. You can now read, and you can now get your hands on a Bible. Go figure it out. Go read it and figure it out. And this created this explosion of a spiritual alternative to the hegemony or the power of the Catholic Church to define how the world works. And so all of a sudden, there was this new way of thinking called Protestantism. And we're going to talk a lot about Protestantism in this class. By the way, let me just stop and say, sociologists love religion. And we're going to talk about religion an awful lot in this class. I hope you like that. Some people are like, don't talk about religion. Sorry, Jack, we're talking about religion. So when you hear the word a lot of people don't know what Protestant is. Some people are Protestants and they don't even know they're Protestants. If you're a Christian and you're not a Catholic and you're not Eastern Orthodox, you're probably Protestant. But all of a sudden there was this new way to explore these sacred texts that are known as the Bible. I mean, my grandmother used to say, Randy, we don't have religion, we're Presbyterian, which means you don't have to go to the Pope or the priest, or, you don't have to go to a conclave of bishops to figure out what the sacred word is. Go get the Bible and read it for yourself and figure it out. So all of a sudden there's a big crack in the power of the Catholic Church. There is this new thing that's emerging, and it's pretty violent. They were Martin Luther and a lot of those people. I mean, the first guy that translated the Bible into English, I'm forgetting his name. I'll put it up on the screen. It was burned at the stake, because how dare he take this thing that only the priests were allowed to read and allow people to read it, in their living room. I don't think people had living rooms in 1400s, but so there is this schism that happens. It opens the door. Okay, that's number one. That's the first thing, is the Protestant Reformation sort of challenges the domain of the Catholic Church to explain everything. And fairly quickly, over the course of a couple of centuries, we get things like the Church of England that opposes, is seen as an opposition to the Catholic Church. Okay. Protestant Reformation. If you don't know about the Protestant Reformation, Google it. It's a really important part of our human evolution. A lot of people should know about that, especially if you are Protestant, if you're Catholic, or just interested in religion in general. Okay. Then the next thing that is important in this story of the Enlightenment is Galileo. Galilei was an Italian astronomer. I'm sure you've heard of him. Galileo is so important to this story because Galileo really, really kind of puts together what become the values of the Enlightenment. So there was this picture of the universe coming from the Catholic Church, and it said the earth is the center of the universe. Based on the reading of the Bible, the earth is the center of the universe. In fact, Jerusalem is the exact center of the universe, and the sun and the planets and the stars all go around the earth. They're all going around there. We're the center of the world. God made us the center, and everything is going around it. And we still kind of have that idea when we say sunrise and sunset, like the sun is rising, and then the sun is setting. It's not. We're just turning toward it or away from it to make it look like it's rising and setting. The sun ain't going nowhere. So there was this alternative theory that goes back to the Egyptians, called the heliocentric view of the world, popularized by a guy named Copernicus, that said, the Catholic Church is wrong. It's actually, the sun is the center of our universe, and the earth and all the planets are going around it, and the stars are just out there. Catholic Church is wrong. It's not the sun going around the earth, but the earth going around the sun. Completely rational theory, right? A rational theory. What Galileo did is said, hey, let's figure this out. We have this technology now, and we always go back to technology, called the telescope. And I can do some measurements, and I can kind of look at how things move, and I can figure it out. And he came up with evidence that the Catholic Church was wrong, and in fact, the earth is going around the sun. The Catholic Church was not happy when Galileo came out with his research, and they arrested him, and they put him on trial in an inquisition in Italy, and found him guilty of heresy. Because if the Catholic Church is wrong about the whole organization of the cosmos, what else are they wrong about? Right? Probably everything else is suspect now that one has been taken away. So they arrested him, put him on house arrest. Supposedly when he was convicted, he said under his breath, it still turns, meaning I'm right. I want to be fair to the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church did pardon Galileo in the year 1992, Pope John Paul II. They're like, yeah, I guess we got to admit we were kind of wrong on that one. But what Galileo did, so he had this, this trial in 1615 was his big trial, really opened up a discussion about what do we need to find the truth? What is the truth and how do we get there? And what Galileo presented to us are two really important values that then became the core values of the Enlightenment, the core values of the Enlightenment. The first one is rationality. Do things make sense? Are things rational? As an undergraduate at Emory University, one of the requirements to have a bachelor's degree is you had to take a logic class. Not exactly the most exciting class, but it was meant to train you how to think logically. If A equals C and B equals C, then A equals B. Basic logic, right? We have to learn to think rationally. So we can apply that to the world that we are living in and the stories that we're told. I mean, this is one of the things that drives me crazy. I don't know if you may know the story of Noah's Ark. Woo! That one is a funny story. Is that story logical? That two of every species on Earth came to the Middle East to get on Noah's boat, including penguins from Antarctica. I had to wait on the penguins. The penguins here yet? We got to go. There's 40 days and 40 nights of rain coming. Penguins are still on their way. That they all were on the ark, and then a couple of people, and then God kills every living thing on Earth. Every baby, every grandma, drowns them. All the other animals, they're all drowned. And then out of the, people and animals that are on the ark, the earth is repopulated. I mean, there's like 1,000 different types of monkey species. It's not a logical story. It is a fairy tale. So it's not rational. Was the earth created in 6 days and the earth is only 6,000 years old? It's not really a rational story. So, this idea of rationality, that things have to make sense, which was Copernicus. Copernicus said, yeah, the sun could be going around us, but it's also rational to think that we're going around the sun. That was a rational theory. But that's not all you need. You need the second part, the second value of the Enlightenment, which is what he called empiricism. I need physical evidence. I need to do research. I need to look for evidence of this theory, this rational theory. And that's what he did with his telescope. He came up with ways of measuring the movement of bodies in space to make the case that, look, I have physical evidence that the earth is going around the sun, suckers. So those two values, rationality and empiricism, give birth to this idea of the Enlightenment. We call it the Age of Reason. And we generally talk about the Enlightenment as Europe in the 1700s and America in the 1700s as this explosion of not just rationality and empiricism, but an explosion of science, of being scientific about things. And this isn't necessarily anti-religion. It's just saying there's an alternative way of thinking about the world. You can be an Enlightenment thinker and still be a religious individual, and many Enlightenment thinkers were. In fact, in France, there was an explosion of these guys called the philosophes in the 1700s, like Montesquieu, that believe that religion and science can coexist at the same time. They're not polar opposites. But we get this sort of new way of thinking. Let's be rational. Let's be empirical. Let's not just rely on the Pope to tell us, what's what. Let's figure it out using these basic values. And there's a bunch of stuff that we get out of this period, the Enlightenment. Sometimes called the Age of Reason because of its emphasis on rationality. And here's three things. I'm going to give you three things, and then sociology is going to be the fourth one. And the first one is the encyclopedia. The encyclopedia was a new thing in the 1700s. And the idea of the encyclopedia is, let's go out and learn stuff. Let's put it in a book where other people can read about it and create a body of common knowledge that people have about how things work. And then as we learn new things, we can go back and revise the stuff that we have. It's not that science answers questions once and for all. We're constantly updating science. I mean, we even saw this during COVID. The more we learn about how to prevent it, then we change our understanding of it. The nature of our understanding of it is going to change the more we learn. So the encyclopedia, and I think the perfect example of this is Wikipedia, which is sort of probably the place online I spend the most time is Wikipedia. It's a great place to find information about your favorite album, for example. And Wikipedia can be updated all the time as things change. I always love watching how stories on Wikipedia kind of change over time as more information comes in. So, encyclopedia is a product of the Enlightenment, rationality and empiricism in a book. The second thing, probably not as well known, but a favorite of mine, is something called the ant farm. I don't know if you know what an ant farm is. As someone who lived in the last century, ant farms were very popular in the days before video games and multiple screens and endless electronic ways of entertaining ourselves. My daughter is downstairs playing Dress to Impress on her computer right now. What was the ant farm? And what the ant farm was a way of understanding how ants live. Okay, so before the Enlightenment, here's what people thought about ants. Remember, this is when everything is determined by the church. And ants were from hell. Ants were demons. Ants lived below the ground, so they live in hell, and then they come up and attack you when you're having a picnic and bite your ankles and steal your pickle. How about we do some empirical research on ants? So what all an ant farm does is take, some dirt, put it between two pieces of glass, put some ants on it, and then let them burrow into the ground. And then you get a cross section of what's below the anthill. And you can see how they organize themselves. And guess what? They're not worshiping Satan. That may come as a shock to some of you, but yeah, I mean, and so as a kid in the 70s, this sounds so dorky now, there would be some kid in the neighborhood who would have an ant farm, and you'd go like, let's go over to Randy's house and watch ants for an hour. And you would just watch, it'd be fascinating watching these ants in their little world do ant things. And so that is something that came out in the 1700s. They were very popular in the 18th and the 19th century, the ant farm. I don't know. You could probably go on Amazon and find an ant farm now, but probably not as popular as TikTok. So that's number 2, ant farms. Encyclopedias, ant farms. Oh, the third thing that comes out of the Enlightenment is the United States of America. Maybe you've heard of it. It depends on how old this lecture video is. It may be in the rearview window if you're watching it a few years after I record it. Yeah, if you remember the history of this country, we were a British colony, so we were ruled by a king who was given power by the church, who was given power by God, the divine right of kings, right? So we use these old ideas going back to the Greeks of democracy, and let's have a rational system of one man, one vote. And of course, in those days, there's one white man with property, one vote. It was only 100 years ago that women got the right to vote. But let's have this rational system. We've got empirical evidence from past times, like ancient Greece, that democracy can work. And let's throw off the yoke of the old empire, and let's get rid of the king and create this thing that is based on empiricism and rationality called democracy. And now it's the birth of the United States of America. Of course, our revolution against the old order starts in 1776. The culmination, kind of the peak point of the Enlightenment, is 1789, July 14th, 1789. That's the start of the French Revolution. And the French Revolution was really seen as being bigger because it was meant to be. So 1789, July 14th, a bunch of revolutionaries, badasses stormed the Bastille in Paris, which is where they kept all the political prisoners, and freed them and threw off the old order. And, because the French king was given power by the Catholic Church, it was seen as even more of a big kind of statement about, hey, we're changing everything. We're getting rid of the Catholic king. The French Revolution didn't turn out quite as well as the American Revolution. It got pretty bloody. They called it the Reign of Terror. There was a lot of people that got their head chopped off. This is where they invented the guillotine because it was more effective in executing people. And then kind of collapsed. And then this little guy named Napoleon Bonaparte came in and created pretty much a dictatorship. So it took France a while to figure it out. But those ideas were there. Those ideas of rationality and empiricism that gave birth to modern science and the United States of America. Okay, the fourth thing, encyclopedia, ant farms, USA, is sociology. Is that if we can be scientific about ants. And we can give birth to all these modern sciences, including astronomy, including, you know, zoology and biology and all sort of the modern sciences that explode during the Enlightenment, because we're not just deferring to the church. Why can't we be scientific about people? Why can't we study people the same way we would study animals? There has to be some scientific understanding. And of course, one of the big Enlightenment thinkers who comes out of this period in the 19th century is Charles Darwin. I mean, Charles Darwin is the perfect example of the Enlightenment, because there's this irrational notion that the Earth is only 6,000 years old and was created in 6 days. Like, people started discovering dinosaur bones. They're like, where does this fit in the Adam and Eve story? It just didn't. It wasn't making sense. So he went and did research. You know, he goes to the Galapagos Islands and looks at a self-contained unit and looks at how the biological organisms adapt, and develops his theory of the origin of the species and this idea of evolution straight out of the Enlightenment. So if we can do science about biological things, why not be scientific about people? So there's this guy, this Enlightenment thinker, who was literally born during the French Revolution in Paris, 1798, named Auguste Comte. Auguste Comte is a really important character in this story. And Auguste Comte is kind of the first guy to say, all right, let's be social scientists. He's like the guy that says, let's have a social science. And he's interested in applying these ideas of rationality and empiricism kind of around two big questions, or two big ideas. One is something he calls social statics. Social statics. Social statics is about stability. How things stay the same. How did Europe stay the same for 1,000 years and not really change? How do certain institutions like the church persist for centuries? How do social institutions like the family survive? I mean, the family is the family. Like, really, we still have families no matter what who's telling us how the world is organized. We still have families. How is this stability persist, and what is the value of these things that persist? What he called social statics. But the other thing he was interested in, what he called social dynamics. How do you explain when there is change? I mean, this is a time when there's incredible revolutions happening all over the world, but especially in Europe and the Americas. And on top of that, this is the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and people moving from the city to the country, and voting instead of letting the priest determine everything. I mean, there is just incredible change. So he wanted to understand the change too. And these are these two sort of things we're always trying to balance. Why are things always stay the same? Why is there so much change? So he believed that you could be socially scientific using those principles of empiricism and rationality to understand people. And for that great contribution, we give Auguste Comte the grand title of the father of sociology. The father of sociology. We don't know where the mother is. She ran off, maybe with the milkman. But he's the father of sociology. So if you ever see, for example, on a midterm, who's the father of sociology, you know now the answer is Auguste Comte, who was the first person to put forth the idea that we can be socially scientific about people. Okay, and so out of that, this is Comte's in the 1800s. We start getting these ideas and these theories, including Darwin, and then other people. We'll talk about a guy named Karl Marx, for example, who is a big social thinker, rooted in ideas of empiricism, that we can be social scientists. So that's our origin story. We'll bring it to the 21st century as we go forward. But in our next section, we're going to talk about two really important 20th century ideas that emerge. One is something called the sociological imagination from C. Wright Mills, and I'll probably say this in class. I'm not here to make you feel comfortable. I'm here to make you feel uncomfortable. My job is to provoke you and feel uncomfortable. And also a great concept from the 1960s called the social construction of reality that will blow your mind. But in between those concepts, there's also this thing called the three assumptions of sociology. When we're talking about Comte and building sociology, what does that mean besides the scientific study of whatever the definition was of society and social interaction? We have these sort of basic assumptions of sociology that we sort of lean on. And I'm going to save those for our in-class discussion. That will be sort of our first class lecture, the 3 assumptions of sociology. So make sure you take notes during that, and that will hopefully tie everything together. So if you have any questions about the Enlightenment, please feel free to bring them up in class. There is going to be a lecture question for this video that you're going to be seeing on D2L. And that's the start. That's it. I hope that was good. I hope that was a good first lecture in this new era that we're in. All right. You're watching the next video on the sociological imagination and the social construction of reality. That's next. Okay, that's it. I'm going to stop talking now. Thanks, everybody.